I grew up in the Texas Panhandle, Amarillo, Texas in particular, and I was thinking about what it was like back in the 50s and 60s, growing up in the Thomason dash King family. My dad had 8 brothers and sisters, and my mother family had 8 brothers and sisters, and they all lived within a day's drive of Amarillo, Texas. And we had a couple of uncles and aunts that lived in the Arkansas, had some that lived in eastern Oklahoma, and one Thomason brother lived in Wichita, Kansas. But these were all within a day's drive of Amarillo. And a good portion of the Thomason King family lived in Amarillo. And so there was always a lot of family, cousins and aunts and uncles. And we even had a couple, an aunt and uncle that lived with us for several years. And so the family was close. And there was this extreme amount of loyalty to family. For example, my dad insisted that we attend South Lawn Assembly of God Church in Amarillo, and the reason was his 2 brothers went to church there, Sam and George. And so my dad insisted that the family stick together, so we went to church, even though we drove by a couple of Assembly of God churches on our way to that one. It was the furthest one out from our house, but that was the one his brothers went to. And these were 2 brothers that he shared a car lot with for 35 years. And so Monday through Saturday, they worked on the same corner, selling their used cars. And then on Sunday, one day where they were not working together, they went to church together. And then many Sunday afternoons, we would go for a Sunday drive, and we would wind up at Uncle George's house or Uncle Sam's house or Uncle Murray's house or, one of the cousins' houses. And it was amazing how even without announcing it or it was back before cell phones. All we had was, the little rotary dial party line phones that hung on the wall. But still, they would wind up at the same house. And a lot of our memories of childhood and growing up include our cousins and our uncles and aunts and our times when we got together. Well, whenever we got together, we were all Christians. Everybody was a Christian. And so my Uncle George was very prone to saying, hey, there's enough people here, we could have a prayer meeting. And so everybody would just hit the deck and start calling on God at, top of their lungs, praying, laughing. Some would weep, some would laugh, some would pray out loud, some would pray in tongues. And they were all just, the whole clan, my dad's side of the family, my mother's side of the family, they were all tongue-talking, Bible-believing, praying Christians. And so one of the great memories that I have of that time occurred during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 1960s when Russia was putting missiles in Cuba, and John F. Kennedy was president, and he was telling them, get the missiles out or we're going to go to war. And the whole country was in a panic. Troops were moving south, tanks and trucks loaded with troops and ships and airplanes and everything were headed for South Florida. And people were real fearful that there was going to be a war. And history tells us that war was very, very narrowly averted. But during that time, I remember one Sunday afternoon, we were at my Uncle Murray King's house. he lived right next to some railroad tracks in southeastern part of Amarillo, and we were all there. I mean, the house, it was a little cracker back, you know, just a wooden frame house, and not very big at all. But that living room was jammed with family, and they were all praying. And I was 10 or 11 years old, and I'm sitting in the corner. This is before I got saved. I'm sitting in the corner, wide-eyed, and I'm looking at this whole thing, and they were praying so loud that the house literally shook, and the window panes would rattle. And during that prayer time, there was a knock at the door, and it was a policeman. The neighbors had called the cops and said that, there's a wild party going on next door, and you need to go over there and quieten them down. So he came and knocked on the door. My aunt opened the door, and I'm sitting in the corner not far from the door. So I heard their conversation. And the policeman said, the neighbors are complaining that you're making too much noise. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. We're just praying about the missile crisis in Cuba, and we're just calling on God." And he said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Well, don't let me disturb you. And I just have one request. Can you pray for me too?" And she assured him that we would pray for him. And he shut the door and went on his way. And it was just a matter of hours before that crisis passed. And but these are the kind of memories that I have growing up in the 50s and 60s, where the family was always close. There was always plenty of family around, and we were all Christians. And what a heritage it is. Nowadays, families are scattered about everywhere. That generation, all 16 of those people and their spouses are gone on to heaven, and many of my cousins have gone to heaven, and yet, I think back on that, and I really, the more I see what's happening in the world today and what's happening to families and how splintered families have become, and what they do when they do get together. Very rarely do they, hit the deck and pray. I appreciate the way I was raised and how I grew up. And the fact that I grew up in a church that when they would say, "Brother Thomason, would you stand and pray?" 5 men would stand up. I mean, it was just a house full of family. And even though that church was 150 people or so, a good 30 of them were family. And yet that family was so godly, they never caused trouble in that church like some family-dominated churches would. And but I just love the fact that families who pray together stay together, and I long for those days to return, where families will be quick to pray, unashamed to pray, and understand the absolute power there is in family prayer. Anyway, I just thought I'd share that memory with you. All right, bye-bye.